good evening. We're so sorry to join you late. I'm very excited to belatedly welcome you to this Telegraph Extra event. My name is Will Brooker. Apologies for the technical hitches there, the delays. I'm a professor in film and cultural studies at Kingston University in London, and I'm author of a new book, The Truth About Lisa Jewell. This is an exclusive event for Telegraph subscribers. Thank you very much for joining us. I do appreciate it. A little bit of housekeeping. You can see a screen in front of you. You can make that video full screen if you like by clicking on a square to the bottom right. We know there are lots of you joining us. We can't see you. You can see us. We can't hear you. I'm just imagining you all in your homes and welcoming us in. Thanks again for that. There should also be, if you scroll down, a Q&A box where you can type your questions for Lisa or indeed for me if you like. So if you scroll down, you'll be able to type them in and they will be fed through to me. 40 minutes into our chat, that will be at about 7:50 by my reckoning, we will turn the discussion over to your questions, to questions from the audience, and I will ask Lisa on your behalf. Until then, it will be me and Lisa having a bit of a chat. I'm very glad to introduce now the star of this evening, international best-selling author, the research subject of my book, and someone who since perhaps summer 2021 I've been able to call friend. It's Lisa Jewell.
Hi, hello, hi Will, lovely to see you, and thanks everybody else for coming to watch us.
It's very nice to see you again, Lisa. And this Lisa brings back memories because it is how we began in January of 2021 on Zoom. We started out, we had met beforehand. We had met once.
Without knowing it.
No, Lisa. We had met once.
Oh, yeah. The coffee shop. Yes, we had met.
You were aware.
Yes.
You were aware that I was there. I was sitting opposite you. But our first proper research meeting was on Zoom. You were in a little office rather than your literary salon. I was in my study where the magic happens. So anyway, good to see you again. And this is actually, just to point out to you, this is actually how a lot of the research was carried out, through a lot of Zoom chats, which I recorded and then wrote about afterwards. So let me fire off with a question. You burst on the scene with your very successful debut, Ralph's Party. You describe it as a curry and flatmates genre. Other people labelled it chick lit. It's a witty romantic comedy. Its cartoon cover gives us a sense of the tone. Now, it's about 23 years later. You're about to publish your 20th novel, The Family Remains, which is what I was writing out in my book. Everything has changed. If someone was like a Rip Van Winkle, if they'd been asleep for 23 years and they came across, oh, Lisa Jewell again, Lisa Jewell of Ralph's Party, and they saw the books there behind you, I think they would wonder if it was the same author. We now have these thick tomes with cold, foreboding, sinister images on the cover, big neon, or in some cases golden font. You've been called the Queen of Crime now, perhaps the new Ruth Rendell, and you're writing these sinister books still about relationships and about families, but the tone has very much changed. How would you explain that change to someone who was only aware of Ralph's Party, but also what has remained the same in your writing since 1999?
Yeah, well, that's actually a really good question. I mean, I think I would explain to the Rip Van Winkle, who hadn't read any of my books since Ralph's Party, that obviously a lot of time has passed. But I would also say that even in those early books with their cartoon covers that look so lightweight and fluffy from the outside, I was already, I think, exploring some quite dark areas. And there was this this preconception about books that were marketed as chick lit with the cartoon covers, that they all sort of fitted into this same stereotype of a young woman sharing a flat who's in love with the wrong guy, who has a tense relationship with her mother and a gay best friend, and sort of falls over in her high heels a lot and drinks lots of Chardonnay. And that just wasn't the case for most of the books that actually came under the blanket banner of chick lit. There was an awful lot of interesting things being written about at the time. And it's actually just a very demeaning title for what was basically commercial women's fiction. So even then, with those early books, I was already exploring quite dark themes and seeing how much I could get away with in a way. But it wasn't until about 7 or 8 books in that I finally abandoned using the template of the romantic relationship to form my plots around. And I wrote a book called The Truth About Melody Brown, which was about a woman trying to rediscover her lost childhood memories. And that was the first time I didn't have a romantic relationship at the heart of my book. And then I started sort of playing around with family dramas, family sagas, family mysteries for a few books. And again, every time I wrote a book, I was pushing boundaries and seeing how much darker I could go and how much further I could leave behind the earlier
And then
books,
you killed
the
someone,
expectations.
Lisa.
Say
Then you
that
killed
again.
someone. You killed
Well,
someone.
yeah, and then I thinking about my 12th novel, I finally kind of in fact I threw a character under the wheels of a night bus on Charing Cross Road in suspicious circumstances. So I would tell that person that I've just, I started writing my first novel when I was 26 or 27, and I've just changed. Life has changed. I've just moved on, but I'm still the same person obsessed with darkness and depravity. And I used to read a lot of real crime books and what have you when I was younger. But I just write about those things more now than I ever did before.
I mean, I think if someone had fallen asleep in 1999 and woke up in 2022, there might be other things we would want to break to them before we
Oh
explain
yeah,
the career of Lisa Jewell. There'd be a lot of things that they had missed. Yeah,
yes. Well,
interesting
but
what
in
you
terms
say
of
there.
you asked as well about what's remained the same.
What's the same?
And I think my voice. I do think my voice. It's funny because if I ever have to look back at one of my old books for any reason, which I try and avoid doing because it makes me feel cringy, I always imagine that it's going to sound like it was written by somebody else, and it never does. It still sounds like it was written by me, just the way I form sentences and the sort of language I use and the tone and the pace and the voice. It's all the same, but I was just writing about completely different things back then. I would also say back in the older books, I used a lot more exclamation marks. I was very liberal with the exclamation marks, and I don't use those anymore. So that's one big
Well,
thing
it's
that's
like if we
changed.
looked at a diary from when we were 25, or a letter we'd written, or even a photograph of ourselves, we recognise it, but it's just, the same person, but it's changed. Yeah,
It's the
what
same
you say
person
about,
changed, exactly.
I think you're absolutely right. There is more darkness in Ralph's party than might immediately come across, and perhaps there was more even in earlier drafts than was finally published. But what you say about Chicklet, I think there's a great deal of truth in that. I think if Jane Austen was published in the 90s, perhaps not today, it would have also had that label. And of course, Bridget Jones owed an awful lot to Jane Austen, so it is a very reductive term.
Yeah, and I think we finally got rid of it. I think it's. I feel like it's faded away at last, but it was it's hung around like a stubborn smell for a very very long time, and I'm glad it's faded away now. Nobody's calling Sally
Yeah, I
Rooney
mean,
chick. Put it that way.
no, let's not bring it back. Basically, I was using
Yeah,
it
let's
there,
not
but I
bring
was
it back.
using it
Yeah,
I was using it in quotes in the past. Yeah.
yeah,
I shadowed your process from January 2021. It's easy to lose track of time these days, isn't it? January 2021 to January 2022, which was this year, I believe. Um, it was a unique experience with. I've never experienced a book like that. I wasn't writing the book. I was reading the book, but I kind of feel I lived the book, because of
yeah,
the process. I feel I was right inside that book intimately. I feel that book is almost like a member of my family. That seems strange, maybe a distant cousin or something. But of course, your book isn't out until July. So, what would you like people to know about that book? I see you have it sitting behind you. I don't yet have a copy, but I've
yes.
read many, many drafts.
I have it
What
next
would
to
you like
its.
people to know about that book now? Yeah.
Oh, okay, so well, there's two ways of talking about the book, and I will talk about the book in the way that assumes that the person I'm talking to hasn't read The Family Upstairs, which came out in 2018, which was the first book. So it's a pair of books. But I'm going to assume that I'm explaining the book to someone who hasn't read that book. So it starts with the discovery of a bag of bones on
Maybe
the
you need
banks
a
of the River
bag.
Thames. bone of bags, a bag of bones on the banks of the River Thames, which launches a detective investigation into whose bones they are, how did this person die, and who killed them. And it leads back to a house on the banks of the River Thames in Cheyne Walk, where many years earlier, 3 dead bodies had been found on the floor in the kitchen wearing black robes, while a baby lay awake and well cared for in a cot in a room upstairs, and 4 teenage children had disappeared overnight, never to be seen again. So yes, that's a fundamental flavour of the book. But then there's a much longer description as well, but it all gets very complicated when I try and do that one.
Yeah, that's a very good elevator pitch. I think it's
Yeah.
it's very effective. It's also a sequel to The Family Upstairs, and I write about it in my book. So in a way, there'd be 3 different potential readerships there: people who know The Family Upstairs, people who don't, and people who've read my book, which inevitably will tell readers some of what's going to happen in The Family Remain.
Yeah.
I've tried to avoid any spoilers about the final chapters, but inevitably, someone wanting to know about what's in your next book could do worse than look at my book for heavy hints, I think. Yeah.
Yes, but no, definitely spoiler free. Yes, no, it's definitely a book you can come to from many different angles. This one, and yeah, and it's my first sequel. It's not my first sequel. It's my second
It's
sequel
your second
actually,
sequel,
but
yeah.
first sequel since I've been writing thrillers, which makes it slightly more complicated to carry out. And it was, yeah, that sort of getting that balance between writing a book that somebody who literally just walked into a bookshop and picked it up and thought that looks nice, never heard of Lisa Jewell, but I'd like to read that, could enjoy, but also would be satisfying for people who'd read The Family Upstairs and wanted more. So quite a difficult balancing act, and depending on who's read it so far, different responses to how successful I'd been with that. But yeah.
I mean, I felt it was very successful. So.
Good, thank you.
You're very welcome. We're always honest with each other, I think, and I like the book very much as you would like a distant and strange cousin. You're probably asked. I mean, you are asked. You often asked for advice on how to become a novelist. You know, and I've seen you ask this. I've seen you give the answers online. You're very helpful and supportive. What if that person followed your advice and became a successful novelist, and then a professor approached that person and said, I would like to shadow you from one January to another and write about your next book? What advice would you give that person?
Well,
I'm talking about us.
Yes, of course. Yes.
Right.
So you're saying, what advice would I give myself? Because I think I'm a very particular sort of person. I am. I don't have a lot to hide, and I am very comfortable to a certain degree. I have a little force field around me, but it's quite tightly around me, and beyond that, I'm pretty open about absolutely everything. So for me, it was making that decision to let you into my life and let you into my writing year and my writing processes. It felt like a bit of a no-brainer. It felt like number one, it was lockdown and life was quite dull, and this was something that seemed like an extra bit of sparkle, an extra bit of connection, an extra dimension to what was going to be quite a sort of one-dimensional year. And what was the other thing? Oh, that was it. The other thing that I found really attractive about the request was that you were a man and I was a woman. And I thought it was a really unusual proposition, because it's particularly as a woman writing commercial fiction, there is that sense that nobody takes it terribly seriously. And I was and it wasn't like a sort of fangirl situation of someone, you know, a woman wanting to write about me. I liked that dynamic. I liked that it was unusual and refreshing and hadn't actually been done before that I'm aware of. Certainly not about a writer who's still alive. So that I found that fairly irresistible. But
Mm.
yeah, if I was going to give myself some advice about the way that last year panned out, I would just say to absolutely go for it. I think it totally added a layer of enjoyment to the writing process that hadn't been there before, and genuinely didn't take anything away or make anything more difficult or challenging. But then I think we were quite well matched because you absolutely respected my boundaries, as small as they are. My boundaries are quite small, but you respected them, you saw them, you knew where they were, and you didn't even come close to putting a foot across the wrong line. So yeah, it was. I thought it was a really enjoyable project and
Mm.
worth doing.
That's very kind of you. It's very, very nice to hear. Thanks. Yeah, I mean, now that time has passed, we can reflect upon it, and yeah, you're right. I think the gender was important in some ways. We found a lot in common, but also a lot of differences between us in terms of the routes our lives took. We're a similar age, but we have different family situations and different kind of educational backgrounds. But yeah, we overlapped in an interesting way, but there are also interesting differences. I didn't actually think
Yeah,
about it, but I do think you're right. The idea of a male professor um, approaching quite humbly a female writer of popular fiction, maybe that is an unusual thing. I mean, it didn't strike me as anything but appropriate at the time, but perhaps you're right. Yeah,
well, it was
really.
definitely
Anyway,
appropriate. It was refreshing.
yeah,
It
yeah,
was,
sure.
yeah.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure. Didn't feel like a thing at the time, but yeah, perhaps you're right. Anyway, it was a very interesting dynamic. I don't know if it could happen twice, even between me and you. I was said to you just today. I don't think I could have done the same about your current book. I think it needed to be that book.
Yeah,
Anyway, so you'd say to yourself, do it. I would say to myself, do it as well. If I could go back in time, whether it would work for two other people,
yeah.
difficult to say.
I have had a lot of other authors throw their hands up when I've told them about this in just shock,
Mm,
like
mm,
who actually say you were really brave, which I didn't
mm,
feel like I was doing anything brave. But yes, I think there's um, a lot of vulnerability in other writers that they felt might have
mm.
put themselves in a sort of, yeah, a delicate
I'm not sure if
position.
I would.
But
I'm not sure if I would do it again because I don't think you can necessarily make magic
no,
work twice. If you know what I mean. You
definitely
know.
not.
No. It's worked, and I'm very happy with the result. Let's not speak about ourselves anymore, or we can talk about you. And Lisa, if you do want to ask me any questions, I'm an open book, as the saying goes. Um, you have talked about your influences in fiction. There are many people who admire in fiction. I know that one of them is Agatha Christie, and I've written about the relationship between your work and Agatha Christie's. But I know you're also influenced by something which authors don't talk about quite so much, and I admire that you are very open about this. Television. We both like crime drama.
Yeah.
Which television shows do you think are most influential? Not specifically necessarily, because I know there are some specific influences. You've taken some things, well, you've not lifted them, but there have been some direct influences. But what TV do you think influences your crime writing or films?
Well, I mean, yeah. Well, interestingly, talking about how authors don't often talk about how TV influences their work, going back to Ralph's Party, that was influenced more than
Mm,
anything, more than Bridget Jones, more than anything that was happening back in the 90s by This Life, the TV show, much more than anything. So yeah, I think TV absolutely plays a huge part in informing the way I think when I'm visualizing
mm,
the story I'm trying to put onto the screen. And yeah, I mean, we talked about during the writing of your book, we talked about The Unforgotten as
Unforgotten, good one.
yeah, massively inspiring and influential, particularly when I was writing The Family Remains. And it was watching The Unforgotten, and so I had all these threads from The Family Upstairs that I needed to weave together to make a sequel, but it seemed to be missing something. And I was watching The Unforgotten, and it was that sense of how all these disparate storylines have to come
Mm,
together and meet at some point. And in The Unforgotten, it's always the remains of a body that's found at the
mm,
beginning. Some terrible blighted soul that something awful happened to many, many years ago and has not been thought of since, apart from a few people scattered around the world who still live in fear and guilt about their part in whatever happened to that person. So that was the starting point for the family remains, was very much that unforgotten structure of a bag of bones that leads back to this unfurling of terrible dark secrets and uncovering things that people have been trying to hide away from for years and years and years.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely right. I was thinking about some of the things we both like. We both like a bit of Line of Duty, don't we? The Split.
I know.
Um,
Yeah, except I don't do police procedures, so
no.
that's the absolute antithesis of how I approach writing about crime in my books, because I've never studied police
Mm,
procedure,
mm,
and so in fact this is my first book with a proper detective in it. I generally
mhm,
try to keep the police very much in the background, so I don't have to talk about what they're doing and get it all
mm,
wrong. So yeah, Line
mhm.
of Duty. Obviously, everybody loves that, but that is
And
very, very different to books that I
you
write.
listen to, as I do as well. We sometimes
Yeah,
recommend each other true crime podcasts as well. So
yeah.
podcasts as well as TV, isn't it? Yeah.
Yes. Oh no,
Yeah.
all
Thanks.
absolutely. It all goes in there. It's definitely not just
Mm,
books that inspire
mm,
writers
mm,
in
mm,
terms of how they
mm,
structure
mm.
their work. Definitely not.
Although I think some people might not admit it because they might think
Not many.
TV doesn't sound quite
But also
so.
we've come from being a world in which you either read a book or watched a movie, where the whole story is truncated down to an hour and a half, to a world where you read a book or you watch a 8 hour or 13 hour Netflix box set, which is kind of the equivalent of reading a book. So those two things are sort
Mm,
of balanced out over the last few years, which shows that there is that the appetite is much more towards the longer story, the slower telling of the story.
mm, 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 mm. And Ralph's Party never was actually adapted to a film or TV, even though, I mean, I know that your agent at the time, I seem to remember your agent at the time felt it would be ideal for adaptation. But what can you say about the prospect of adaptation of some of your work now? What's happened now? What are the prospects for Lisa
Yeah.
Jewell on screen?
Well, in fact, when Rouse Party came out, it did get an awful lot of attention in that sort of red
Mm,
hot, like, oh, here's a book of the moment. And it did
mm,
go under option. And as so many things do in that sort of environment, that red hot environment, nothing happened. And then nothing happened. And then nothing happened. And I wrote book after book after book, and nothing happened. And nothing happened. And then I started writing thrillers. Yeah, there's this very, very sort of symbiotic thing at the moment between thriller novels and box sets on the television, and they sort of feed off each other as I feed off them. TV production companies are obviously very keen to adapt these novels for the screen. So I currently have gone from 0 books
mm,
under option to 7. So 7 of my novels are currently under option, including The Family Remains and The Family Upstairs, that have been optioned as a pair. So they would be
amazing.
produced into, they want to do them into three seasons, so 2 books split into 3 seasons. And then 5 of my other thrillers are under option as well. And there's also one of my rom-coms that's been under option
Mm,
for 12 years. It's been under option for 12 years, and now the production company send me £1 every year to renew the option. Yeah, it might get made one day, but we'll see. We'll see.
it's
So yes,
so
at the moment,
exciting. Yeah,
it is
so exciting.
exciting, but you have to hold off on the excitement because
Mm.
just so little stuff gets made. So little stuff gets
Hmm.
made. So yeah, we'll see. We'll see. It
I,
would be
I
a
think that's
marvelous.
some.
It would be
Sorry,
marvelous.
I interrupted with you. It would be
Yeah,
marvelous. I think that's
yeah,
something that many people don't realize. And I mean, I'm on the outside of this kind of world, and that just how much is optioned and never gets made, and
yeah.
how many projects just drift.
Run out. Yeah, they
You know,
they
it
run out of
happens.
steam. It all seems to start with, you either need a big star who wants to
Mm,
sort of run with the whole thing, or you need
mm,
the perfect
mm,
screenwriter,
mm,
and that's what they're always waiting for. And if they can't pick up the right writer or a star to get on board with it, then it's very, very unlikely to happen. And I have no interest in writing my own screenplays or scripts. So I'm sort of enthralled to all the other genius people out there who write for television, and just hoping and praying that one of them one day will go, yeah, I'd love to adapt Lisa's book. And it happens. But yeah, so far it hasn't, but it would be fantastic if it did.
Well, it sounds like you're getting close, and the family novels, as I call them, they've been, whatever stage they're at, it's with the production company that worked on Slow Horses, isn't it? Is that Mick Herron, I want to say? The crime,
Yes,
the spy drama
that's
with
it.
Gary Oldman that was recently. Yeah.
Yes,
So,
yes.
a
It hasn't
very,
actually been
a
officially
very.
announced yet. I think you can say that quite safely
Oh,
without
sorry. Oh, I'm sorry.
breaching
Well, let's just
any
say.
privacy. But yeah,
Well, let's just say that
yeah, it is.
there
No,
have
it
been
is. It
talks
is.
with.
It is.
It is.
Yes,
Okay. I'm sorry
exactly,
if I
exactly. Which was
overspoke
an
a bit.
amazing. It was an amazing adaptation
Yeah.
of the Mick Herron novel. If nobody's seen it, really, with Gary Oldman, absolutely superb.
Let's just say conversations have been had with that production company. I'll say.
Exactly.
Yeah. You've. I've learned a lot about your writing process, and a number of things about it have surprised me, and I'll come on to the other one later. But one of the things is just how happy you are to cut, and how much has been cut from your existing novels. I mean, you told me, I won't go into it now, it would take too long, but I think a third was cut from Ralph's Party before publication, and you've told me what happened in the cut bit. And I mean, it would have, in simple terms, it would have made it much darker, and it would have
Yes.
made it quite a different genre almost. Um, you lost a chapter of The Family Remains while you were writing it, which I know you were unhappy about. You've cut chapters. I know that your editor tells you to cut, and you very, very happily do it. You don't cling on to your baby darlings, to every word you've written by any means. Could you say a bit about your attitude to editing? I think you've said to me that it makes you happy. It's kind of liberating to cut because you know it's right to cut. Is that how you feel?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And you asked me this question on a good day to ask me this question, because I'm coming towards the end of writing my 21st novel. And I realised as I was coming towards the closing chapters that I'd paced it all wrong. And what I needed to do was cut huge chunks out of it and rearrange them. But in the cutting out of the chunks and the rearranging, I've lost a lot of stuff. And I find that the minute I've cut something out of a piece of work, I never ever think of it again. It's gone. It doesn't matter how much I loved it in the moment of writing it, or how many times I reread it and thought that's a nice piece of writing, or I love that scene. When it's gone, it's gone. And the joy of it is I know that every single time I cut something out of my work, I've made it better. I never end up with a bad haircut for whatever reason. And unlike hair, if I decide that I should replace something, it's there in another document, and I can just cut and paste it back in. Yeah, it is. It's like decluttering. It's like you've been living in this room, and you just know, even though it's quite a nice room, you know that the cupboards are full of crap, and you know that there's this huge pile of something under the desk that needs to be sorted out. And you just know that this room could work so much better, and you'd feel so much more comfortable in this room if you could just deal with all the clutter. And that's how it feels to edit to me. It feels like decluttering, and like decluttering as well, which feels overwhelming sometimes when you're sitting in the room thinking, where do I start? I don't know where to start. And it always feels like that when I come to a manuscript, knowing that I've got work to do on it. But then you start, you do the first thing, and then the machinery starts sort of getting into gear, and you're like, yeah, I know exactly what I'm doing now. And I'm a fervent editor of my own work. I love self-editing, and I love also using my editor's editing notes to make cuts and changes as well. I know an author who shall remain nameless, and I only discovered this 2 weeks ago, who sends her book directly to the copy editor and bypasses the editor, so it doesn't ever get changed after she's finished writing it. which just makes me feel quite uncomfortable, the thought of my book as it leaves my laptop going out into the world for people to read without somebody having improved it for me. So yeah, I'm a very, very enthusiastic editor.
And last year, I mean, gradually, I think we evolved to the point where I was making suggestions that we didn't
You
anticipate at
did.
first.
You did, and this was wonderful. And as we said earlier, I don't think it would have necessarily worked with everyone or anyone, but every time, a little bit like working with my editor, anytime you made a suggestion, it felt like you'd seen the book, you understood the book, you knew what I was trying to do with the book. You weren't trying to put your own mark on the book. You weren't thinking, oh, if this was my book, I'd do this. You absolutely saw the book through my eyes, which is what my editor always does. She sees the book through my eyes. And not only did you make a couple of suggestions, but you also helped me out at the very end when I came up to a sort of roadblock with a storyline that I couldn't resolve because I couldn't find a way to make it make sense. And yes, so there you go. Added benefits of having someone shadowing you for a year is that they can help you
Yes, I think
out.
this is in my book. We were in a London club, which was
we
a
were
literary salon.
we were at a literary salon in a London
In a
nightclub.
cold night in December.
Yes,
And
yes. So that was a definite added bonus.
Because you had let me become so much part of the process, I feel that I was inside the book. And so when you asked me, how should this happen? I was able to answer very quickly because I could see it. I was inside the book. So I was very happy, connections. We talked about chicklet a little bit, a term that I don't want to bring back into currency. Your middle period might be best described as family drama, although really all your books are kind of family drama. And now people would consider you a crime writer. So that's maybe 3 overlapping genres. Are there any other genres that you consider writing in? Are there any other genres that you would never touch, do you think? Because you have moved through genres. Is there anything you think you wouldn't write, or anything you might move into in the next 40 years? Or are you going to stick with
40 years? Oh, what a lovely thought.
Why did I say 40? 20?
Well, no, let's stick with 40.
Lisa,
I'll go 40. I'll go 40.
in 2062.
Yeah. I would probably not. I did have a little dabble with a historical novel back in the middle of my career. And I probably wouldn't do that again, mainly because I don't like doing research. And yes, I don't. Yeah, you can't write a history. I could put all my Lisa Jewell essence into a historical novel, but it would have to be completely backed up with solid research and knowledge. And I don't want to do that. So I would not write historical. I would probably not write fantasy. I would probably not write romance again. I don't think I would do that again. I don't think I would go backwards. But I might have a little go at something more science fiction-y. And amazing. I think you know what I'm talking about. I do actually have a second project coming up.
Lisa, I was told off last time I brought this up.
Yes,
so
but I know how to talk about it without getting sued. I have been commissioned to write a novel by a different publisher in a different genre. So I'm actually writing 2 novels this year, and we'll be publishing 2 novels in 2024. And one of them is slightly in the area of the sci-fi genre. So
I know what this is, and it will blow people's minds.
Yes, I think people's minds might be blown. Yeah.
I would probably have said
that I wouldn't do that, but I've done that. So there you go. I'll be writing a historical novel next.
Will blow your mind. We have about 2 minutes left. I'd like to ask you 2 more questions. So let's try and do them quick, because I can see some good questions coming in already, which is very exciting. Thank you very much for your questions. Let's do this quick fire round. Okay.
Oh.
This should be let's try and make this one quick. For people who aren't best-selling authors, because this is something that surprised me, how much of being a best-selling author is not actually writing a novel, but doing the work that goes around it? Writing blogs, doing this kind of
Yeah.
event. Although, of course, it's a pleasure to do it, right? How much of
Oh,
your
yeah.
job is not actually writing the novel?
Yeah, more and more. There's definitely a very solid correlation between how many books you sell and how much you have to do that's not writing books. Um, I mean, there are authors who sell fewer books than I sell and take it upon themselves to market themselves and spend an awful lot of time when they're not writing, promoting themselves and going to festivals and doing stuff online. But this is stuff that I'm asked to do from a professional standpoint to support all the money and time that's invested in my publishing campaigns by my publishers. So there's a definite, the more they're spending, the more time they're spending, the more money they're spending, the more I'm expected to do. So hours, I would say I probably spend about 4 hours a day doing things to do with my job that aren't writing my book, and probably only about 2 or 3 hours a day doing the actual writing. Sometimes none at all if everything spirals out of control. So yes, it's a surprising amount. And it's hard not to feel resentful about it, because I know it's a signifier of the fact that I'm doing really well and that my publishers support me and love me and want to keep selling my books. But it's also frustrating to want to just sit and write my book and just constantly have loads of other things in my diary that I need to do before I can do that. So yeah.
Sure, yeah, I think a lot of people wouldn't realise that. I'm going to move on to audience questions in a minute. I just wanted to ask you one more. The detective you speak about in your latest book, your first proper detective, is Samuel Owusu, who originates from Ghana. The anti-hero, Henry, is a gay man. You've also written a mixed-race heroine. You've written old men. You've written tween girls. You've written various people who are not exactly like you. I mean, what would you say to the debate that I've sometimes seen online that people should stay in their lane and they should only write people like themselves? What's your feeling about that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I write an awful lot of people who are exactly like me. I write an awful lot of middle-aged mothers from North London. But all my books are cast quite widely. I use a lot of characters in my books, quite often as narrators. Multiple points of view in the same book, and I can't just keep writing books from when I'm using multiple points of view from the multiple points of view of four middle-aged mothers from North London. I have to use other people to help tell my stories, and it's I just kind of have to go with my gut with it. And so, for example, with Samuel Owusu, um, he kind of brought himself into the book. He was only supposed to be in the first chapter. He was supposed to be my detective who finds a bag of bones on the shores of the Thames, and thus the whole story springs from that. And I wasn't going to go back to him, but he just sort of kept reappearing, and I kept writing about him, and I kept thinking, is this bad? Am I going to get in trouble for this? Writing about a man of colour? Am I crossing some line? And I just thought, well, I don't know. I'm going to have to just write it and find out. I'm going to have to write it and find out if I've done something wrong here, because it just didn't feel wrong while I was writing it. He was my detective, and I could see him, and that's what he looked like, and that's what he sounded like, and that's where he came from. And yeah, so it is, to consciously stay in one's lane is quite a difficult thing to do as a writer. In fact, it's virtually impossible. But I just think when you do write about people who are very different to yourself, you have to just use sensitivity, common sense, understand that there are people out there who you could hurt with your words, and write it accordingly. So that's basically how I deal with it.
No, thanks very much. I mean, it's a big topic. We could talk about it for longer, but thanks very much for that brief and thoughtful answer. We have an interesting question from an audience member, and I know that there is one character in Ralph's Party who was based on someone you knew, but the question is, do you use people in real life as inspirations for your books? And I know there was someone you barely disguised the name. Are there any other examples? I don't know if I even want to say who it was. But...
Yeah, so this is again a bit like Samuel sort of turning up in my book. I will start writing the character thinking that they're just one of my randoms, you know, one of those people who've just dropped into my head from nowhere. And then I'll suddenly get to a point of thinking, I've just realised who I'm writing here. This is X, Y, or Z person. I actually did it to my own daughter with one of my books. I got a few chapters into the book and thought, I am writing my child into this book. And I never back away from it. I just think if this person is supposed to be in this book for whatever reason, subconscious reason, I brought this person who I know in real life into this book, I'm just going to go with it. But I would never consciously think, I'm going to write a book about the woman next door, or I'm going to write a book about my daughter's teacher, or I wouldn't do that. But they do find their way in anyway, subconsciously, yes.
Don't they inevitably become quite different from the actual person, though? Partly because of the role they're serving in the story, and because, you know, you have to know them far better than you know the person in real life.
Yes, absolutely. No, they do totally become different.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
And here's a question, which is a good one because it's something I was going to say anyway, but I've now saved the answer because I saw a question coming in, which is, Will, thank you very much for asking me a question, Nicola. What is the thing that surprised you most about Lisa's writing process? And it is simply this. I could not believe that Lisa does not plan her novels, because she writes these intricate webs of plot, and they're just made up as they go along. And it took me a while to actually get my head around this and believe it, but I suppose I believed it because I saw it happen. I mean, particularly my favourite Lisa Jewell book is Watching You. And I just felt this is such a complex and perfectly balanced and plotted book. I just couldn't believe it just been made up, but it is. We're here with Lisa, so I'll just throw it open to Lisa. Is that the case? You do not plot, you make up as you go along?
Well, I was at a book event once, and always at book events this question comes up, this sort of plotter versus pantser approach to writing. And I'm always asked about it, and particularly if I'm on a panel and you always get a cross-section of writers, some of whom plot and some of whom don't. And a woman in the audience said, I don't believe in plotters and pantsers. I believe that some people plot outside their book and some people plot onto the page. So that's now how I describe my process. I plot onto the page while I'm writing. I don't make notes anywhere. I don't have a chapter planner, or I don't even have an outline. I don't have Post-it notes or a whiteboard or anything. I don't have anything that exists beyond the screen, the keyboard, and my fingers, the words on the screen. That's it. That's where the book exists, nowhere else. So yes, I do not plot. I do not plan. I just go where the wind takes me.
It surprised me, and that's the truth.
Yeah.
Lisa, there's another question for me here. I'm not quite sure if
I'd love to hear you answer your questions.
Okay, thanks very much. I'm glad that the focus is on me from the question, or am I just picking the questions about me? The question is, it's a very interesting. Always another question for me. It's a very interesting question. What would you have done if Lisa said no? And also, why did you decide to write the book? One of the reasons I decided to write the book, or at least with hindsight, it seems that way to me, is because I decided to write a book about David Bowie in 2015. And halfway through my research, David Bowie died. Even though if David Bowie had been alive, it would have been very, very difficult for me to get any kind of contact with him. I wanted to do something which was very, very different from writing about someone who was completely distant and remote, and also tragically had just passed away. So I wanted to write about the creative process with someone that I could ask directly about that process rather than trying to work it out from the outside. I wanted to be more inside the process. And it just so happened, you know, I was invited to a literary salon. That's how this began and ended, with a literary salon. We should name check our friend Paul Burston, who runs the Polari Salon, which is where we both spoke. And then we went into lockdown. I thought, you know, I should read that Lisa Jewell stuff, which she was reading from. So I started reading Lisa's books. I became very, very taken with it very quick. And, you know, I kind of thought, well, I've almost got an in with this author, because I know someone who knows them. We have a kind of bit of connection. So this idea would actually be possible. If Lisa had said no, I would have respected that and been disappointed. And I think over time I would have moved on to a completely different project. I don't think I would have done this. And I think it was, you know, lightning in a bottle, or whatever the expression is. I think it only would have happened. only would have worked with Lisa. I don't think I would have tried to pursue anyone else really. And I think if I had, it wouldn't have been as good. So it was just one of those things which it worked at the time, and I think it couldn't have worked in a different way. Thank you for the question. Here's a really interesting question for you, Lisa. Do you think the divide between commercial fiction and literary fiction is an artificial one? After all, surely what readers want is a good story well told. We've talked about this, and this audience member loves the idea of commercial fiction being examined in a serious way. We've talked about this. It's a chapter in my book. Do you think the divide between literary and commercial is artificial?
Oh, I mean, define the. I mean, you can't define it. It's you read some books and you think this feels literary, and then you read other books and you think this doesn't feel literary. And then there are some books that are in that sort of, they're for me the sweet spot. I love books that are neither, that are beautifully written but completely gripping and page turning. And yeah, I don't think you can divide it up like that. I think it's a wibbly wobbly line between literary and non-literary, and it's impossible to define which is which until you're actually reading it. And then of course each reader will have a completely different perception of what's literary and what's not. I remember somebody describing Zadie Smith as chick lit once back in the noughties. So it's completely subjective what is literary. It just, you feel it when you're reading it. There's something about the quality of the prose. There's something more beyond the surface of the words than just pushing the plot along. That's my feeling when I'm reading something that feels literary. But equally, I don't enjoy reading books that are difficult to read. So going back to that sweet spot of the book that's full of that delicious prose that presses buttons inside your head and makes you think about things in a certain way. But also you just can't stop reading because you want to know what happens next. Those are my dream books.
Yeah. It's a difficult question, isn't it? Let's pretend you asked
really
me as well, I think.
Yes. Bill, what do you think?
Well, thanks very much. I think literary and commercial, in a way, have a purpose, which are categories for selling things, just like genres, just like chick lit and thriller. In a way, they're useful boxes that publishers use in order to decide what kind of cover they're going to put on it, who they're going to ask to review it. I think probably it's a spectrum, isn't it? And there are extreme examples, like I would say James Joyce's Finnegan's Wake is probably at one end of literary, very, very hard, obscure to read. And the kind of book you might pick up at an airport and enjoy on the beach is probably near the other end. And yeah, there's no reason why a book cannot contain elements of both. So I think we both agree. Here's a question. It strikes me, says this person, that you write as a business, not an art. Am I right? I would say that you do treat it as a job.
Oh,
well, but also you try and write as well as you possibly can. Well,
I actually find that question vaguely offensive. I'm interested to know why the listener, the viewer, has reached that assumption based on what? No, I do not write.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I do not write as a business. My goodness me, it feels nothing like business while I'm writing. Everything else is business. All the stuff that my publishers want me to do is business, and they're busy at Penguin Random House and in Pimlico doing the business of publishing my books and selling my books. But what I do when I'm sitting here, where I'm sitting now, this is where I write. When I'm sitting here with my head and my keyboard and my screen and the words appearing on the screen is nothing like business. I'm writing a story. I don't think you can get much less business-like than making up amazing stories about people who don't exist and things that haven't happened. So I don't know if that question was worded, unfortunately, but no, absolutely not. I work in the business of publishing, but when I write, it is not business. It's writing. It's creating. Do I sound a little spiky?
I just want to add something here. I of course I agree with what you're saying, but also it is your job, and you need your books to sell. So I mean, there is a commercial aspect. You need your stories to be good, so people will want to read them, so people will buy the books. It is it's your job, just like everyone has a job, and they need to earn money doing the job. So
Yeah.
there's an aspect of commercial.
Yeah, but that's not what I'm thinking of when I'm putting the words onto my screen. I'm not thinking about how many, if I put the words in this order, will I sell more books?
No,
If
no,
I
no,
introduce
no,
this
no, no.
character, will I sell more books? I'm just thinking this story needs to work. I need to find a way to make all these elements. Like I just spent today just cutting my story up and reordering it to keep the pace and keep the tension going so that the person who picks it up at the end of the day actually enjoys reading it and doesn't get bored and put it down. That's what I do, and that doesn't feel like business at all. Not at all. Anyway, moving on.
Lisa, I would love to move on, but we just got another question which is really similar. And I don't know
Oh,
if this is
right.
because of the way I'm presenting it. I'm gonna frame this question in a certain way. It's about why you started writing. Now, let me just try and frame this rather than quote the question exactly, because we don't want to get you more fired up. You started writing because you'd been made redundant from a job, a shirt maker. I think you'd been administrator at Thomas Pink or a shirt making company.
Oh, yes, I was a secretary. I was working as a secretary for a shirt making company in Battersea.
So you were out of a job, but you didn't write a novel thinking, I need to make money now, did you? I need to bring in some money. You
No.
started writing a novel partly because you had the freedom suddenly and because famously your friend bet you a
Yeah.
meal if you would write 3 chapters. But you didn't start writing thinking, right, I need to bring some money in now. No, not at all. No.
No. I just started going out with the guy who I'm married to now, and I was delighted when I found out how much money he earned because I just was so convinced of the fact that I was never ever going to be in a position to earn money because I wasn't ambitious. I didn't have goals. I didn't have skills. I didn't go to university. I wasn't on a career trajectory. So I did think, wow, if I'm going to end up with this guy, it's great that he earns quite well because I'm never going to. And yeah, so in my 26th year, while I was earning the princely sum of £16,000 a year as a secretary for Thomas Pink, the shirt makers, and had just lost my job, I had this very serendipitous conversation with a friend about the fact that, yeah, one day I'd like to write a novel. In my head, I thought women in particular, didn't write novels when they were young. They wrote novels when they were middle-aged. So the thought of me writing a novel was completely ridiculous and audacious. And luckily, she was quite forceful and insisted that this could be fun. You never know what could happen. And this is a turning point in your life. You've just lost your job. You haven't got a job to go on to. Why don't you try something new, take a risk? And so I did it just to satisfy a bet with a friend. And nobody could have been more surprised than me. And I did think, even when I'd sent out these 3 chapters to literary agents under pressure from the same friend, that if I did get a book deal, it would be one of those £5,000 book deals. That's what I thought. I thought, well, it's either A, not going to get published at all, and B, if it does, it will be a little £5,000 book deal. So yeah, I did not go into writing my first novel thinking I was going to make any money. Nobody could be more surprised.
£5,000 in 1999 would be all right.
No, it wasn't.
£5,000 would be
in
quite generous.
1999.
Even now, it's not bad actually. But I think you'd agree someone shouldn't try and write their first novel because they want money.
Never,
No.
never, because very, very, very few people make money out of writing. Very, very
few
vanishingly
people
tiny
don't
number
need.
of people.
Yeah, very few
Yeah.
people. I think I'm right in saying don't need a normal job as well as their
Yes.
writing.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
It's
Yes.
not. It's interesting that we have got those questions. Those questions.
Yeah.
I can't help thinking maybe it's my fault. Here's a different kind of question. How do you start your creative process? And I know that you were thinking about the book you're currently writing last summer when you were in the middle of The Family Remains. So that's the question. When did you come up with the idea for your next novel? You've just finished one almost.
Yeah. So it varies. I usually get my idea for the next novel while I'm in the middle of writing the current novel, which is what happened with this one. But as you know, being at the beginning of the process of writing The Family Remains, I didn't have an idea, not a proper idea for that at the beginning of the writing year. I had to wait for that to come to me, as it did one morning when I was lying in bed before my alarm went off. So yeah, it can happen at any time. What it is, it's a matter of recognizing it. It's a matter of, anybody, writer or not, ideas filter through your head constantly the whole time. You find things interesting. You pick up on details, or and it's a matter of recognizing when the thing comes into your head that could actually be substantial enough to support a 100,000 word novel. And yeah, so that's what I come to my books with every year, is a starting point, because I haven't got a plan. I come with a starting point, and it's usually more often than not a person that I want to write about. And because I write thrillers, I know that something bad is going to have to happen at some point to the person. And then I just sort of feed more and more layers into the book as I go. And I'm often quite surprised by the things that suddenly fall into the bowl while I'm writing the book. Things I hadn't even thought about a year before, 6 months before, even 5 minutes before, suddenly find their way onto the page. So yeah, it starts with one thing and then it just builds layers over the year.
Let me ask you a yes/no question. Do you have an idea for the book you're going to write in 2023? Your next thriller? Do you have an idea for that one
No,
yet? Okay.
no, not even slightly.
Okay. Um, I'm going to look for a nod from my producer, or a shake of the head here. Do we have time for me to say something else? Right, we do. We do have time for something else. I just want to ask you a wind up. It's from me. How did me being involved change the process last year? Because one thing that really strikes me is you have now finished a book, and you didn't finish The Family Remains until December odd, I think. January even. It took about a year. So I
Yeah.
can't help feeling that I slowed you down by about 6 months there. But in what ways positive? No, that's not negative, just positive. Was it different writing that book because of the shadow that you had going on? Because me
Um,
being involved.
yeah, it was absolutely, for me, the best and most positive thing about the whole experience was that you held my writing in high regard. You weren't treating me as a curio or an oddity, and there was nothing
Mm,
patronizing about your approach to watching what I was doing, or to the way you were carrying out your project. And I think, in a way, I wrote, they say be the person your dog thinks you are.
yeah.
It was like that. It's like, be the writer that Will thinks you are. And I think there was a lot of that. I think I slightly upped my game in some ways.
Mm,
But who knows if the reader will notice when they pick up the book and read it, if there's anything different there. But it felt different to me, and it was a lovely feeling. It was a lovely feeling.
mm. Thank you very much. It's a very positive note on which it is time for me to wind up this evening learning the truth about Lisa Jewell. Thank you very much, Lisa. Thank you very much to everyone for joining us. Thank you very much, especially for your questions, even if Lisa disagreed. Still really appreciate it. Tomorrow you will receive a link to a survey, so please let us know how you found this evening, the positive and no, just the positive, please. You're also going to receive a promo code, which will give you 20% off my book if you missed out on the 100 free copies. Let me just, I have a copy of my book here. And subscribers, please keep an eye on the Telegraph Extra website for more subscriber exclusive offers, events, and competitions. On that note, sincerely, it's been a great pleasure speaking to you and to Lisa tonight. Thank you very much. Take care and good night.
Thank you. Thanks, Will.